A 15-year-old stood in a Phoenix garage offering to fix a $200,000 motorcycle. The millionaire laughed and said he'd fix it himself. 2 hours later, that millionaire was arrested, and the boy had proven everything. Mason Carter had learned that some engines sound different when they're worth $200,000 and completely broken. The roar came from outside Carter's garage in Phoenix. Not the healthy rumble of a well-tuned motorcycle, but a grinding, stuttering noise that made every mechanic in the shop wince. Mason was restocking oil filters in the back when he heard it, followed by his father, Tom's voice calling out in surprise. "That's a Callahan Phantom," Danny Rodriguez said, dropping his wrench and rushing to the bay door. Custom prototype. Only 3 exist in the world. And that sound? That's expensive trouble. Mason joined the mechanics crowding the entrance, watching a gleaming red motorcycle being pushed into the garage by 2 men in designer suits who looked like they'd never touched a tool in their lives. Behind them walked Victor Callahan, 52 years old, owner of Callahan Custom Bikes, wearing a suit that cost more than Mason's father made in 6 months. "Careful with that," Victor snapped at his assistants. "It's worth more than both your salaries combined." Tom Carter wiped grease from his hands, approaching with the careful politeness he used for customers who treated mechanics like servants. "Mr. Callahan, what brings you to our shop? I'd have thought Callahan Custom Bikes would handle their own repairs." "They tried," Victor said, his voice carrying the particular arrogance that came from never being told no. "Best mechanics in Arizona spent 3 weeks on this prototype. Couldn't fix it. Engine's doing something nobody can diagnose. Makes that grinding noise, loses power, threatens to seize completely. I've brought it to 5 shops. Nobody can figure it out." He looked around Carter's garage with barely concealed contempt. At the modest equipment, the working-class neighborhood, the mechanics in worn uniforms who'd probably never touched a bike worth 6 figures. "Someone suggested your shop. Said you occasionally handle unusual problems. Frankly, I'm skeptical, but I'm out of options." Mason studied the motorcycle from his position near the back. Even from 15 feet away, he could see what was wrong. Recognized the design. Recognized the specific engine configuration that only one person had ever successfully implemented. His mother's signature style, the radical cooling system placement that made the Phantom prototype capable of performance no other bike could match. "We'll take a look," Tom said carefully. "But I have to be honest, Mr. Callahan. If your own mechanics and 5 other shops couldn't diagnose it, then you probably can't either," Victor interrupted. "But I'm paying you to try anyway. $3,000 for a diagnosis. Another 10 if you actually fix it. Which you won't. But I need documentation that I've exhausted every option before I scrap this disaster and start over." Danny knelt beside the motorcycle, running his hands over the engine casing. Kevin and Brian, the shop's other mechanics, joined him, examining the prototype with the kind of reverence usually reserved for museums. This was the Callahan Phantom, legendary in motorcycle circles, rumored to be the fastest production bike ever designed, worth more than most houses. "Start it up," Tom said. One of Victor's assistants hit the ignition. The engine caught, rumbled beautifully for 3 seconds. Then that grinding noise started. Like metal scraping against metal in places metal should never touch. The kind of sound that made experienced mechanics physically uncomfortable. "Shut it down," Danny said immediately. "Running it like that will destroy the engine completely." "I know that," Victor snapped. "That's why I'm here. Fix it or don't, but stop wasting my time with obvious observations." Mason couldn't stay quiet anymore. "It's the cooling system integration," he said, his voice cutting through the garage. "The intercooler placement is creating pressure differential in the 3rd cylinder. That's why it sounds fine for a few seconds, until the heat builds and the pressure becomes uneven. Then the grinding starts, because the piston is compensating for temperature variance the engine wasn't designed to handle." Every head turned to stare at Mason. Tom's expression mixed pride and concern, pride that his son understood what 5 shops couldn't diagnose, concern about how Victor would react to a 15-year-old offering solutions. Victor's face went from surprise to contempt in approximately 2 seconds. "And you are?" "Mason Carter, Tom's son. I work here." "Work here," Victor repeated, looking Mason up and down, taking in the worn jeans, the faded t-shirt, the oil stains that never quite washed out. "Doing what? Sweeping floors?" Fetching tools for actual mechanics? He's been working on bikes since he was 8, Tom said, his voice careful. Knows engines better than most technicians twice his age. I'm sure he thinks he does, Victor said. Every teenager with a socket wrench thinks they're an expert. But son, this is a Callahan Phantom prototype. Revolutionary design, proprietary technology. It's not some weekend project bike you tinker with in your backyard. I know what it is, Mason said, feeling heat rise in his chest. I know the cooling system uses a radical intercooler placement between cylinders 2 and 3 instead of traditional external mounting. I know the fuel injection timing is calibrated for that specific thermal profile. And I know when the intercooler pressure isn't balanced correctly, you get exactly this problem: grinding, power loss, risk of catastrophic seizure. The garage went silent. Danny was staring at Mason like he'd never seen him before. Kevin and Brian had stopped examining the bike entirely. Tom looked torn between stopping his son and letting him prove what he clearly understood. Victor walked toward Mason slowly, deliberately, using his height and presence to intimidate. You think you understand my prototype? A design that took my engineers 3 years to develop. That cost $5 million in R&D. Because you what? Read about it online? Watched some videos? Because my mother designed it, Mason said quietly. The words hung in the Arizona heat like a challenge nobody quite knew how to answer. Excuse me? Victor's voice had gone very cold. Sarah Carter, Mason continued, his hands shaking but his voice steady. She was a motorcycle designer, worked from home, created custom engine systems for high-performance bikes. She designed this cooling system configuration 8 years ago. I was 7 when she built the first prototype in our garage and taught me how it worked. How the intercooler pressure had to be calibrated perfectly, or you'd get exactly this grinding noise. Tom's face had gone pale. Mason, she called it the Phantom system, Mason said, meeting Victor's eyes. Because it made engines disappear, meant you couldn't hear them coming until they were already past you. Revolutionary cooling that allowed for performance nobody else could match. Victor's expression was carefully controlled, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or fear. Your mother was a hobbyist, a talented amateur working in a garage. The Callahan Phantom was designed by my engineering team using proprietary research and development. If there are similarities to amateur designs floating around the motorcycle community, that's coincidence, not theft. It's not coincidence, Mason said. It's her exact system, down to the specific intercooler placement angles and the fuel injection calibration curves. I can prove it. I have her original design documents, the ones she created before she died. Mason, Tom said, his voice carrying a warning that suggested this was dangerous territory they'd agreed not to enter. But Mason was tired of staying quiet, tired of watching Victor Callahan build an empire on motorcycles that looked suspiciously like his mother's designs. Tired of seeing Callahan innovations that Sarah Carter had sketched in their garage years before they appeared in expensive prototypes. The intercooler needs to be recalibrated, Mason said, turning back to the motorcycle. Pressure differential between cylinders 2 and 3 is probably 0.3 psi off optimal. That doesn't sound like much, but at these performance levels, it's enough to create the grinding you're experiencing. I can fix it in about 20 minutes if you let me access the intercooler housing. Victor laughed. Actually laughed. Cold and cruel and absolutely certain that a 15-year-old was delusional. You want to fix a $200,000 prototype? You, a child who works in a garage in a working-class neighborhood, think you can solve what my engineers and 5 professional shops couldn't diagnose, based on designs your dead mother supposedly created in her spare time. The casual cruelty of dead mother hit Mason like a physical blow. He saw Danny's hands clench into fists, saw his father's jaw tighten, saw Kevin and Brian exchanging looks that suggested they were reconsidering their opinion of Victor Callahan. I'll fix it, Mason said, his voice shaking with anger and grief. I'll fix your bike using my mother's design knowledge. And then maybe you'll admit that Sarah Carter was more than a hobbyist, that she was a genius whose work you've been using without credit for years. Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Here's what's going to happen. I'll fix it. Me. Right here. Right now. Because unlike you, I actually understand the technology. I built this company. I designed these systems. And I'm not about to let some kid with delusions about his mother's garage hobby embarrass me in front of mechanics who are already failing to solve this problem. He turned to Tom. Give me tools. I'll diagnose and repair this myself. Document everything. Because when I'm done, I want this child's wild accusations about design theft on record, so my lawyers can address them appropriately. Tom hesitated. Mr. Callahan, with respect, if neither your mechanics nor 5 other shops could— I said give me tools, Victor interrupted. His voice had gone quiet and dangerous. Unless you'd like me to take my business elsewhere and make certain everyone in Phoenix knows that Carter's Garage harbors teenagers who make baseless accusations against respected businessmen. The threat was clear. Comply or face consequences that could destroy a small garage's reputation. Tom handed Victor a toolkit, his expression apologetic. Mason watched his father cave to intimidation, watched him choose survival over defending the truth, and understood exactly why Sarah's stolen designs had never been challenged. Because people like Victor had power and money, and the ability to destroy anyone who inconvenienced them. Victor knelt beside the motorcycle, opened the engine casing with practiced confidence, started examining components like he actually understood what he was looking at, checking fuel lines, testing electrical connections, doing everything except addressing the actual problem because he didn't actually understand the phantom system he'd stolen. The intercooler is behind the 3rd cylinder, Mason said quietly. You're not going to find anything in the fuel system. I know where the intercooler is, Victor snapped. I designed it. My mother designed it, Mason corrected, and she taught me that the intercooler pressure has to be calibrated using the adjustment valve behind the cylinder head, the one you're currently ignoring because you don't actually know how this system works. Victor's hands paused, just for a second, but long enough for everyone watching to notice. Danny Rodriguez stepped forward. Kid's right. There's an adjustment valve back there. Saw it when I was examining the engine. Didn't know what it was for. It's for pressure calibration, Mason said. Mom built redundancy into the system. If pressure gets off balance, you adjust it manually using a specialized tool she designed. Looks like a modified torque wrench with pressure gauge integration. He walked to his father's toolbox, pulled out something that looked exactly like he'd described. Slightly worn, clearly custom-made, with Sarah Carter's initials etched into the handle. She made 2 of these, Mason said, holding it up. Gave one to Dad in case he ever needed to work on her designs. Said it was the only way to properly calibrate the phantom system. Victor stared at the tool with an expression that confirmed what everyone in the garage was beginning to suspect. He recognized it, knew what it was, which meant he knew about Sarah Carter's work, knew it wasn't amateur hobbyist tinkering, knew he'd built his empire on designs that weren't his. Gimme that, Victor said, reaching for the tool. Mason held it back. Let me fix it. I know how. I've done it before on Mom's prototypes. 20 minutes, and your bike runs perfectly. I'll fix it, Victor repeated, his voice hard. I don't need a child's help with my own design. Then you don't need Mom's custom tool either, Mason said. Because if you actually designed this system, you'd have your own calibration equipment. But you don't. Because you stole her design without understanding how it actually works. The accusation hung in the air. Danny, Kevin, and Brian were watching this confrontation with growing understanding. Tom looked torn between pride in his son's courage and terror about the consequences. Victor stood, abandoning the motorcycle, walking toward Mason with fury barely contained. You have no idea what you're talking about. Your mother was nobody, a hobbyist working in obscurity. If I use similar designs, it's because great minds think alike, not because I stole anything. Then prove it, Mason said. Fix your bike without my mom's tool. Show everyone here that you actually understand the phantom system you claim to have invented. Victor's hands clenched. For a moment, Mason thought he might actually grab him, but instead Victor turned to Tom. Your son just accused me of theft in front of witnesses, called me a fraud, claimed my proprietary designs belong to his dead mother. He's 15, Tom said desperately. He doesn't understand. He understands enough to make defamatory claims that could destroy my reputation. Victor interrupted. So here's what happens next. You fire him, publicly, right now. Apologize for his behavior, and never let him near my property again. Do that, and I won't sue this garage into bankruptcy. Refuse, and I'll make certain Carter's garage becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when you let your children slander successful businessmen. Mason felt his world tilting. His father was going to fire him, was going to choose the garage's survival over defending Sarah's memory, was going to let Victor's theft stand unchallenged because fighting back was too expensive, too dangerous, too likely to destroy everything Tom had built. Or, Danny Rodriguez said, his voice cutting through the tension, the kid fixes the bike, proves he knows what he's talking about, and then maybe Mr. Callahan explains how a 15-year-old learned to repair a system he supposedly invented, without any connection to its design. Victor's head snapped toward Danny. You're fired. You can't fire me, Danny said calmly. I don't work for you. I work for Tom, and I've been working on bikes for 20 years, long enough to recognize when someone's bluffing about understanding their own technology. He turned to Tom. Let Mason try. 20 minutes. If he fixes it, we know he's telling the truth about his mother's designs. If he can't, we apologize to Mr. Callahan and never mention it again. Tom looked at his son, at the custom tool Sarah had made, at the motorcycle that might prove everything or destroy them completely. 20 minutes, Tom said quietly. Mason, fix the bike. Victor's face went white with rage. You're making a catastrophic mistake. Maybe, Tom said, but Sarah was my wife. And if there's even a chance her work is being used without credit, I need to know. Mason approached the Phantom prototype with hands that had steadied now that he had permission, opened the cylinder head casing using his mother's tool, found the pressure adjustment valve exactly where he knew it would be, started the delicate work of recalibrating the intercooler pressure while Victor watched with an expression that looked less like anger and more like fear. Because if a 15-year-old could fix what his engineers couldn't, it meant Sarah Carter hadn't been a hobbyist. It meant she'd been a genius. And it meant Victor Callahan had built a $50 million empire on stolen designs from a woman who died before she could expose him. The calibration took 18 minutes. Mason worked with the kind of focused precision that came from muscle memory, hands moving through steps his mother had taught him when he was barely tall enough to reach the motorcycle's engine. Adjust the pressure valve, check the gauge, fine-tune the intercooler balance until the reading showed exactly 0.73 psi differential between cylinders 2 and 3. Victor Callahan stood 10 feet away, arms crossed, watching with an expression that had shifted from contempt to something closer to fear. Danny Rodriguez hovered nearby, ready to assist, but recognized